I will call to order the Monday, December 4th meeting of the Verona Plan Commission. Mr. Sayre, if you do the roll, please.
Commissioner Manley? Here. Mayor Holcomer?
Here.
Commissioner Horsfall? Here. Commissioner Heinzen?
Here.
Commissioner Turk and Lytle are absent and excused.
We have a quorum, so we will proceed with the meeting. Next on the agenda is approval of minutes from the November 6th meeting of the Plan Commission. And those minutes were included with your packet. What's your pleasure?
Move approval.
We have a motion by Mr. Manley. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Heinzen. Were there any additions or corrections to the minutes of the previous meeting? Seeing none, all those in favor of approval of the minutes signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Motion carried and the minutes are approved. We have a few public hearings this evening and we will take them in the order that they are on the agenda. So the first public hearing is a zoning map amendment to rezone the property located at 310 Locust Drive from the current classification of urban industrial to suburban industrial. Do I have a motion to open the public hearing? We have a motion by Mr. Horsfall. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Heinzen. All those in favor of opening the public hearing signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Motion carried. Mr. Sayre, would you provide some background, please?
Thank you. The request tonight is to rezone 310 Locust Drive from the current classification of urban industrial to the classification of suburban industrial. There's a second item on the agenda, which is item number 5. The purpose of the rezone is to accommodate a gymnastics use in the building. The zoning ordinance requires a public hearing for all zoning map amendments before the Plan Commission, so we are in the public hearing right now. The Plan Commission then makes a recommendation to the Common Council on the zoning map amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Sayre. With that, we are in the public hearing stage for this agenda item. If there's anyone that wishes to speak, we would ask if you would come forward to the podium, and there's a sign-up sheet there. We'd ask you to sign in. And then also for our benefit and those watching at home, if you would state your name and address, please. Is there anyone that wishes to speak on this agenda item in the public hearing? If you would, sir.
Yeah, my name is Don Bush. I'm the actual property owner of the building. My wife Teresa and I built the building and broke ground June 22nd of 2001. We've owned the building the entire time. The zoning that currently is, we could have put in 2 auto repair businesses that approached me that would have been not having to need a conditional use permit. They were a permitted business, but I felt, and my wife felt very, what do you want to say, cautious and concerned as far as the neighborhood, because across the street from us on Locust is all neighbors that live there, sleep there. You know, that's their home, that's their residence. So they're there, lots of eyeballs, lots of ears. And had auto repair businesses go in, and both of them explained to me, oh, we'll be super clean businesses, you know, that type of thing. But I didn't let them in there because I just know that there'd be tires outside, parts outside, not clean businesses. We're a gymnastics facility. There is none in Verona. A lot of the neighbors have expressed interest previous even to April and Steve Namio wanting to be in my building. Because their kids go to Gymfinity in Fitchburg. They also go to Badger Gymnastics in Madison. It would also bring, I think, other opportunities such as Culver's, Monks, different places where when they drop the kids off, they're also, you know, benefiting the city by eating, you know, some dinner, having some beverages, that type of thing. So I just don't see where there's any reason not to have a gymnastics facility. It's a nice clean fit. Our building is set up conducively for it, with just a few minor changes. So I don't know if there's any questions for me.
We're in the public hearing stage now, so if we have questions and we have debate, then
Okay,
we'll call you up.
thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Bush. Is there anyone else that wishes to speak on this agenda item? Anyone else wishing to speak? Third and final time on this topic. Anyone wishing to speak? Seeing none, I would accept the motion then to close the public hearing. We have a motion by Mr. Manley. Is there a second? Seconded by Mr. Heinzen. All in favor of closing the public hearing signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. And that motion carries. Mr. Sayre, anything to add, please?
Yes, so as stated previously, the applicant is requesting to rezone the property from urban industrial to suburban industrial. I think for the purposes of this agenda item, I'll just focus on that aspect for the time being. The property itself is located on Locust Drive. It's highlighted in yellow on the screen before you. As Mr. Bush explained, this property, the building, was constructed in the early 2000s as a multi-tenant type of building. It's operated in a very clean manner over the years in that urban industrial classification. The properties around it, once again, the property in question here is that purple parcel right there. All the properties around it are zoned urban industrial. In meeting with the applicant, we talked about the prospective uses. Staff is actually very supportive of this rezoning request. I think the big change from when this building was constructed in the early 2000s to now is we obviously have a large amount of residential to the east of this property and also to the south as well. Staff believes that the suburban industrial classification provides a better transition of uses to those residential areas. As Mr. Bush explained, the urban industrial district does allow automotive repair. That's a use that has obviously potential noise issues with it as well. In our staff report, we also outline all the uses in the suburban industrial district and the urban industrial district. And in general, the suburban industrial is just a better fit with these adjacent type uses. So with that, staff did go through the rezoning findings of facts, and we do believe it does meet the three requirements of the ordinance. And staff recommends that the Plan Commission recommend to the Common Council to rezone the property at 310 Locust Drive from the current classification of urban industrial to suburban industrial. I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you, Mr. Sayre. Any questions for Mr. Sayre? Any questions? Mr. Horsfall, please.
It's really for Jeff. How much traffic is on Locust, and is this going to be, a high traffic area that people are trying to go in and out of at a tough time of day or something at all?
Mr. Monpass?
Locust is traveled moderately high. It's not a major thoroughfare during the day. It sees a lot of traffic in the morning, obviously because of schools, and in the afternoon. I don't know what the operational hours of the gymnastics studio would be. My guess is it's probably late afternoon into the evening. So it should, even if there's a little bit of delay getting in and out of there, I don't anticipate it being a major bottleneck trying to get in and out of that property on Locust.
Okay, thanks.
Other questions? Any other questions? If not, potential action would be here to recommend to the Common Council. Do we have a motion at this point? Mr. Manley, please.
I'll make a motion to recommend that the Common Council approve the zoning map amendment to rezone 310 Locust Drive from urban industrial to suburban industrial. Sorry, I didn't have my mic on.
That's all right.
I'll say that again. I'll make a motion to recommend to the Common Council that they approve the zoning map amendment to rezone 310 Locust Drive from urban industrial to suburban industrial.
We have a motion by Mr. Manley. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Horsfall. Questions or comments on that motion? This is on the rezoning only. Questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. And that motion carries. Next, I would accept the motion to open the public hearing on the conditional use permit for the same property. Do I have a motion to open?
So moved.
We have a motion by Mr. Heinzen. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Manley. All those in favor of opening the public hearing signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. And that motion carries. Mr. Sayre, if you'd provide the background, please.
Thank you. This is a conditional use permit for proposed gymnastics studio to be located at 310 Locust Drive. Gymnastics studios are classified as an indoor commercial entertainment land use in the suburban industrial district and require a conditional use permit. Public hearing is required before the Plan Commission, which you are in right now, and the Plan Commission then makes a recommendation to the Common Council for potential approval of the request.
Thank you, Mr. Sayre. Anyone from the public that wishes to speak on this agenda item? Anyone that wishes to speak under the public hearing? Anyone desiring to speak? Seeing none, I would accept the motion to close the public hearing. We have a motion by Mr. Horsfall. Is there a second? Second. Seconded by Mr. Manley. All those in favor of closing the public hearing signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. And that motion carries. Mr. Sayre, please.
Once again, the property in question is highlighted in yellow on the screen before you. The applicant is requesting approval of a gymnastics studio at 310 Locust Drive. Probably the most important thing that staff looks at for these types of requests is just access and parking to the site. Access to the site would be unchanged. I think as kind of follow up to Mr. Monpass's comments regarding access, staff doesn't have any concerns with the existing access point on the site, and it would function well with the proposed use. From a code requirement, the applicant is required to provide 17 parking spaces for the gymnastics studio use. There are 36 parking spaces on the property right now. Staff has no concerns with parking on the site. The use is, in our opinion, compatible with the adjacent land uses. The building itself is set back a significant distance from the road and will not create any nuisance issues for the residential areas to the east. So that staff recommends the Plan Commission recommend the Common Council approval of the conditional use permit to allow indoor commercial entertainment land use at 310 Locust Drive.
Thank you, Mr. Sayre. Questions or comments from Plan Commission members? Questions or comments? Again, if we were to take action, it would be a recommendation to the Common Council. Are there any motions at this point? Mr. Manley?
I'll make a motion to recommend that the Common Council approve the conditional use permit to allow an indoor commercial entertainment land use at 310 Locust Drive.
We have a motion by Mr. Manley. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Heinzen. Questions or comments on the motion? Questions or comments? I'm not seeing any. So all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. And that motion carries. Mr. Bush, these two items will be on the Common Council agenda for December 18th. Thank you. Next, we have a public hearing to review and the adoption of the City of Verona Northwest Neighborhood Plan as an amendment to the City of Verona Comprehensive Plan. The proposed Northwest Neighborhood Plan will modify Chapter 8, Land Use of the City's Comprehensive Plan, by providing details for planned future land uses, utilities, parks, street networks, and other details for lands generally bounded by County Trunk Highway PD to the south, University Ridge Golf Course to the east, the Goodman Jewish Community Campus to the west, and the town of Verona to the north. Do I have a motion to open the public hearing? We have a motion by Mr. Horsfall. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Heinzen. All in favor of opening the public hearing signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. And that motion carries. We are in the public hearing stage. Mr. Sayre, if you'd provide the background, please.
Thank you. In your packet is the latest draft Northwest Neighborhood Plan. Mr. Valerius is on his way here. I think he can probably provide a brief overview when he arrives. In general, I think we had a public hearing in September of this past year on the plan. The Plan Commission did not make a recommendation at the September meeting, but then requested the plan be forwarded to the Common Council for comments. Ultimately, the plan did come back to the Plan Commission for discussion at the October meeting. Probably the most significant change from the October meeting was the staff was directed to remove the heights and densities that were in the plan. I think the Plan Commission was requesting greater flexibility as development happens, so kind of keep their options open. But I think, Mr. Valerius, if you want Jason to provide a overview of all the changes, I think he'd be happy to do that. But it's up to Jason or the Plan Commission as well.
Jason, we just opened the public hearing, and Mr. Sear was providing some background if you want to add anything.
No, like Adam said, I'd be happy to kind of summarize or hit the highlights of the changes, but I think his summary covered the essence of what we've done. So available if you'd like me to talk about anything or answer questions.
Okay, thank you. So with that, we are in the public hearing stage. Again, we would ask if you have any comments on this agenda item, if you would come forward, sign the sign-up sheet, and state your name and address, please. Is there anyone that wishes to speak on this agenda item? Go ahead.
Good evening. I'm Mark Geller. I live at 2681 Country View Road in Verona. I'm the chair of the town board of the town of Verona, and I'm also a member of the Capital Area Regional Plan Commission, better known as CARPC. And the comments tonight, I'd like to focus more on just sort of a regional plan and why I'm going to ask and would request that you deny this adoption and amendment to your city council. Last week we had a meeting. Since we've created a boundary agreement with the city of Verona and the town of Verona, which I think is a great benefit and something that both communities can be very proud of. I think in the short time that we've had the boundary agreement, it's really led to better communication between the town and the city, and more open communication is always a good thing. And the reason I'd like you not to adopt this tonight is because I think we have an opportunity to work together to make this an even better neighborhood plan. The draft that's come back is a little different, as Mr. Sayre pointed out, than the original draft. But in my mind, it's a little more loose and less restrictive, really, than the original plan. And there's a few things within the draft, specifically, that I wanted to mention that I think Plan Commission members should concentrate on, which is the new draft. Actually, one of the things that's in the draft talks about the 732 acres that would be annexed from the town of Verona. And there's really no mention in the new draft of the amount of opposition to the plan when we had the public hearing back in, I think, August of 2017. Again, this, I consider us all sort of part of Verona. There is, of course, the city and the town, but we're all in Verona, and this really impacts Verona as a region. And to that point, there's a few things regarding if it were approved. It just hurts us, I think, both communities, as it takes away land from the town, and without any kind of a market study, we're moving forward with a 730 acre development. If it were to pass, it means that the town of Verona, would have absolutely no development potential, only agricultural and limited site improvements. It continues this sort of trend in turning towns into land banks until a city decides that the land is right for their own development, and it doesn't allow the town to continue to get any sort of revenue from future development. So that, from a regional standpoint, along with a few other points that I'd like to make, and then I'll keep this brief. I went on a bit at our town city meeting last week, and I promise I won't do that. But one of the things that I did want to point out that is mentioned in the draft is, Epic has had quite a positive impact on this entire region, not only Verona, but Dane County. And in the draft, the new draft, it's actually mentioned that Epic would like to have the north entrance to their campus remain a rural feel and rural landscape. And to me, going against sort of the wishes of Epic, not against their wishes, but for as much as Epic has done for our community, they've done a lot to preserve the rural character. They appreciate the natural landscape that's around Verona. This development occurs right on the terminal moraine and directly north of their entrance, which they've worked very hard to maintain their rural feel of their campus. It's also at a spot in Verona that really, to me, is the gateway from the west. Of course, there's 151, but PD is really a more heavily used access when you're coming east into Verona. And our own town hall, there's the new town hall that most of you have been at. You know, we worked hard to incorporate it into the rural setting. We wanted it to have some synergy with the Epic campus, and we really consider it the gateway to Verona, and I think it's something that we should work to preserve in terms of the rural character. I think the residents of Verona appreciate the rural character of the town, and this really starts to take away from it in a major way by having this dense urban development out here. I do want to just move on to a few points and make some comments that are in our existing boundary agreement. And again, I'll just read through these very, very quickly. We approved a boundary agreement with the city, as I mentioned, in 2016. Within that agreement, it states that the city's vision is to build in a relatively compact urban fashion while supporting its downtown and promoting infill and redevelopment. There hasn't been a market study done on the Northwest Neighborhood Plan. Adam Sayre mentioned at our meeting last week. And I really feel like we should slow down and get a market study. Right now, there's a North Neighborhood Plan that North Neighborhood Plan has been in effect for 6 years. I don't think there's been any development on it. And to go ahead into an area northwest of the North Neighborhood Plan, which really hasn't seen any activity at all. Recently, I think there's been a bit of a spike in activity out there. But maybe more of a market study 6 years ago would have indicated that that was not an area that was needed for immediate growth. The other few things that are in the boundary agreement says that this agreement is intended to allow for development in appropriate areas, both in the city and the town, while preserving many of the town's productive agricultural lands, desirable scenic views, and important habitats for native plants and animals. You know, coming west over the top of PD and seeing, coming into the town and seeing the edge of the terminal moraine, I feel like this kind of goes against something that we've already agreed on. Is just, again, I'll mention, we came to this agreement in 2016. The next one is the town agrees to prohibit or restrict urban development in the city growth area A. Our boundary agreement has literally thousands of acres in area A, which are inside the town, and this is a jump right to area B, while we have lots of land in area A that could be developed. If there's such a need for more residential neighborhoods, you know, I really feel that if we stick to the boundary agreement, we should be looking at area A as the areas for residential development. Again, to that point, area A is designated as the primary growth area of the city and the primary growth area of the city in the town for the term of this agreement. The agreement is through 2026. So again, we've had no development in area A, but yet we're jumping right to area B. The town and city agree that the territory located in area B is an area in which full urban development may occur. under the provisions of this agreement. The parties acknowledge that all of the land within Area B is not likely to be developed at urban densities within the term of this agreement. The neighborhood plan is certainly reflecting urban densities. C, in Area B, before annexation, I guess my point here is just coming back to where I hope that we can work together and make this a better neighborhood plan by working together, the city and the town. One of the stated agreements in the boundary agreement is that before annexation, the plat's proponent must submit to the town's planning and engineering staff to review the proposal as it relates to stormwater, traffic, and groundwater impacts. So at the very least, we will be getting together per the agreement to discuss that. And lastly, the town of Verona is, and this is directly from the boundary agreement as well, the town of Verona has been a farming community since its inception, and the rural character of the town is an asset to both the town and the city. The town agrees to prioritize the preservation of farmland in the portions of the town that are conducive to farming. We have an active farm in the Northwest neighborhood now that supports a family. The city agrees to consider impacts on farmland when approving new urban development. So I really appreciate the opportunity to come before you and speak to you on something that does impact the entire region of Verona. Again, it's not a town-city matter, but I feel that as we've demonstrated that if we work together, we can come up with a better plan. So, thanks a lot.
Thank you, Mr. Keller. Mr. Heinzen.
Oh, yes, sure. Ask a couple questions. Would you be able to tell us who at Epic you spoke with about their, I don't know, less than enthusiastic support for the Northwest Neighborhood Plan?
I'd rather not mention names. What I asked was, and actually I got information that Mr. Sayre provided. It was a conversation where we talked more about where Epic employees are trending towards living. And the direct answer to that, and it's backed up by some info that Adam shared with me, is that despite the fact that Epic now is 10, 11 years here in Verona, the trend in housing shows that employees stay downtown. They haven't been moving. Now, of course, there has been Epic employees that have moved to Verona, as they have into Middleton and Fitchburg as well. But I don't want to speak out of turn. When we had the conversation, I don't think it was intended for public comment.
Okay, no, and just one
Go ahead,
further
Mr.
question
Heinzen.
then.
Sure.
You mentioned the people who are currently farming the property, I guess that would be west of Shady Oak?
Right off Shady Oak.
Right.
Yep.
Do you know what their position is? I don't know, maybe they're here tonight
Well, they don't
also.
own the land.
They're farming land?
Yes,
Okay.
right. So I tried to get a hold of them.
Okay.
Unfortunately, I couldn't reach them today. So
Okay, thanks.
I'd love to have had them here. Sure.
Appreciate that, thank you.
Sure. Anything else? All right.
I think we're good.
Thanks
Thanks,
again.
Mark. Anyone else wishing to speak?
Good evening, gentlemen, Mr. Mayor. My name is Caril Owen. I'm from Shady Oak Lane in the town of Verona. And I'm sorry to be here again tonight because my presence means that this committee has not paid attention to the voices of the property owners who are most affected by the Northwest Neighborhood Plan and who were effectively without democratic representation in this annexation. Since September, the Northwest Neighborhood Plans have been slightly modified, but only to make them more vague. When asked about future services that the city would offer to property owners on the terminal moraine, Adam Sayre laughed and said that water and sewer would be far too expensive to provide. Some members of the Planning Committee had, in their October 2nd meeting, disdained our concerns about land preservation. We've been told not to be so negative about development, but instead to offer suggestions as to what development should look like. Okay then, here we go. The best use for some of the best farmland in Dane County is as farmland. We need to preserve the land that we use to grow food for humans and for animals. We need to preserve the watershed that protects our drinking water. And we need to preserve open spaces for our health of our land and our spirits. Assuming that farmland preservation is not in the interests of either the City of Verona or aspiring developers, the next best use for this property in the Northwest neighborhood area is to continue the band of 2-acre residential zoning that extends from Cross Country Road all the way up the Moraine Ridge through the town of Verona into Middleton and on up to University Avenue. The City of Verona would benefit from having an area of large lot, low density, high value housing. Low density residential zoning serves to expand housing stock as a preservation area for wildlife, habitat preservation for migratory birds, surface water filtration, and urban forest carbon sequestration. However, should low-density residential development fail to sate the appetites of those pushing this annexation, let me suggest that we not aspire to create East Washington Avenue West and those levels of urban density in what is a rural farmland. If the intersection of PD and Northern Lights Way is to become a new exurb, then let it be governed by the restrictions that EPIC was required to abide by. Let there first be traffic planning and road construction, followed by the expansion of services and mass transit routes. Let there be reasonable, appropriate densities, diverse housing stock, height restrictions, underground parking, minimal impervious surfaces, dark sky preservation lighting, provision for solar and geothermal energy, and green roofs to preserve the viewshed from the ridgetop and the future Ice Age Trail. In our last meeting, several people stood up to lament the sad state of the local restaurant business, and they brought in an expert from out of state to school us about how to dine appropriately. If indeed we require improved dining options, better models would be restaurants like the French Laundry in Napa or the Inn at Little Washington in Virginia. These are exceptional, world-class restaurants that are set among farm fields and gardens that provide the fresh food for their international clientele. A local farm-to-table restaurant would be a far better fit for our area than a rooftop bar scene. I very much doubt that many of our neighbors would remain in the neighborhood after a summer spent listening to that in their front yard. Finally, the City of Verona seems bent on ignoring the future potential offered by having the Ice Age corridor running through it. Let me repeat what I said in the last meeting I attended. The Ice Age Trail is not just important to Verona or to Dane County. It is the jewel of the Wisconsin State Trail System and is of national importance on the level of the Pacific Crest and Appalachian Trails. The Ice Age Trail runs right through the City of Verona, and it deserves to be a central factor in the city's plans for future development, all those plans. I've personally lived in close proximity to a portion of New York State's Finger Lake Trail System. And I'm here to tell you, hikers are consumers. They stay in hotels when the trail gets tough or the weather gets rough. They shop for supplies. They eat at restaurants. And they share all their favorite places with a world of hiking friends. If Verona decides to treat its segment of the Ice Age Trail as an asset instead of treating it as an inconvenience, many businesses in the city stand to benefit. Channeling hikers into a narrow corridor surrounded by development means that those potential local business customers will hurry past Verona or ignore the Verona segment of the Ice Age Trail altogether, and they will certainly not rave to their friends about the wonderful welcome that they were offered by Hometown USA. Please take into your consideration the concerns and the ideas of the residents of the proposed Northwest neighborhood. We're your neighbors, we're your taxpayers, and we're your future voters. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Heinzen, please.
Sure, thank you. Just a question. I'm not sure if you gave your address before you.
Shady Oak Lane in the town of Verona,
What's the actual address?
3030.
Okay, and can you see from your property any portion of what will be, or
I'm
what would
already
be?
getting blistered by the lights on the intersection of PD and Northern Lights Way.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else that wishes to speak?
Thank you for this opportunity. I'm Doug Maxwell. I'm chair of the Plan Commission for the town of Verona, and I live at 11691 Midtown Road. So I realize the difficult position that you're in this evening, and I would encourage you to honor our boundary agreement, in which we indicate that we will be working and love to work with you on a plan for that area and have you think about infiltrating, or have you think about development first in Area A. Give us some time to work on a development plan for Area B, particularly this area, and I think we'll come up with a product that will be more acceptable to the community, both the town and the city residents. So that's what I'd like to have you do. Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Maxwell. Anyone else that wishes to speak?
Hi, I'm Debbie Paul. I live at 6818 Cross Country Road in the town of Verona, but I'm really almost in the city, kind of a little island. I also sit on the Plan Commission for the town of Verona, and I have heard from the neighbors. I personally know 3 of the neighbors that live on Woods Road, and none of them could come tonight. They were at the previous meeting and spoke against this development. They are the neighbors. They're the ones that are going to see this property. I too am kind of taken aback sitting on a plan commission, and I know what you're set here to have to do and decisions you have to make. And they're hard ones to make when you have neighbors say no, 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 and you have a city that needs to grow. But I too looked at the boundary agreement, and I was sitting there when the town discussed agreeing to this boundary agreement, and from a personal perspective, I felt like Area B was not going to be in the city's annexation for quite some time, and I'm quite taken aback by this happening so quickly, so fast. So I too ask you to vote no on this and let us sit down and talk about it and see what kind of more development is going to happen. We understand that, but let's work together and try and make it more feasible for the neighbors. You've got a rural church across the street. You've got a shooting range across the street. We really need to look at this. So I encourage you to vote no. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Paul. Anyone else wishing to speak? Anyone else wishing to speak?
Hello, I'm Kay Rutledge. I'm the Assistant Park Superintendent for the City of Madison Parks Division. And Brian Grady has been here previously to speak with all of you regarding the City of Madison and the letter that Mayor Soglin provided in support of the Ice Age Trail Corridor. As a representative for Madison Parks, it's important to have a plan that clearly contemplates an Ice Age Trail corridor and to actually have it well defined in the neighborhood plan. It helps us, it will help all of us then to achieve the goal. And it's an important goal, as you've heard from others here tonight, because it's an important amenity, not just an amenity, just a critical component for the area as well as for the region. Identifying the Ice Age Trail corridor as a cross-hatched area, yellow for residential and green for open space, would help in this regard, rather than just having it as a note in the text within the plan itself. This plan could then be something that supports and fosters a spirit of collaboration with the City of Verona, the property owners, the Ice Age Trail Alliance, and others to help realize this dream. So I hope you'll consider that.
Thank you. If anyone else wishes to speak, Mr. Heinzen, I'm sorry.
Sorry, I do have a quick question for you. I take it that you're familiar with the Ice Age Trail, I guess, between Verona and Middleton?
Yes.
Okay. How much of, I guess, what could be the Ice Age Trail has already been or has become the Ice Age Trail? And what portion of it is still, like this section, not yet, I guess, turned into the trail? So I guess that's my question.
I'm probably not the best person to
Okay.
answer that question, but
Okay.
I think there are others here who might be able to respond to that.
Okay, that's fine. Thanks.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Hockhammer, Commission members. I am Kevin Thusias. I'm Director of Land Conservation for the Ice Age Trail Alliance, and appreciate the opportunity to speak today. Maybe I can get to your question in a moment. We are located right down the road in 2110 Main Street in Cross Plains, village of Cross Plains. We're your neighbors just down the road. On June 15th of this year, the city and the town of Verona became one of 7 Ice Age Trail communities at a celebration at Badger Prairie County Park, one of the open spaces preserved along part of the Ice Age Trail. This designation as a trail community solidified a long-standing relationship that we have with the town and also with the city of Verona. And the Ice Age Trail exists in both of these communities as it passes through lands such as the Hill property or Redden Soccer Field, Badger Prairie County Park, Badger Mill Creek Parkway, Prairie Moraine County Park. And these were intentionally preserved for the Ice Age Trail. Worked with the landowners, acquired property, and they're there for the Ice Age Trail and also for lots of other recreational pursuits. And as somebody mentioned earlier, a way to get out into the wilderness that we have in the town of Verona. The Ice Age Trail doesn't just happen. It has to be planned properly and appropriately. And in order to make it one that is worthy of National Scenic Trail standards, the Ice Age Trail is one of only 11 national scenic trails in the country, and it is the direct intent of the Ice Age Trail to give users a scenic experience to walk or backpack or run, walk your dog, a place to recharge after a hard day at work or driving on the Beltline for an hour. And it gives, Verona is no different. The 11.5 miles of current Ice Age Trail in the city and town of Verona is only about a 5-minute drive or maybe 20-minute walk from almost every resident of the city. So it offers opportunities for the residents to get out, including the students. The local high school, a core knowledge charter school, Glacier Edge, Sugar Creek, including my wife's kindergarten class at Sugar Creek, has been out on the trail to learn to get outside and to use the outdoor classroom. And here's another opportunity. The Ice Age Trail is much like your other infrastructure in the city. It needs to be planned for appropriately. The great thing about this infrastructure is that we have a legion of local volunteers who take care of the trail and the properties around it. So it's hard to find a better deal than that, I guess. I encourage the city of Verona to think about the Ice Age Trail as an experience and think about the Northwest neighborhood area as an opportunity to do something up on the terminal moraine there where you can protect the land, leave it for folks to recreate in, and create a home for the Ice Age Trail, and not just a narrow corridor, but something that is appropriate for a national scenic trail. There's also side trails and spur trails. Our number one user of any new segment of trail especially is the local residents. They're always the biggest users, often dog walkers and other walkers and hikers. And then, of course, we had a study done a few years ago where we determined that the state of Wisconsin the Ice Age Trail brought to the state of Wisconsin $113 million in revenue and about 1.25 million users each year. And I can guarantee you that it's gone up in the last 5 years since that study was completed by UW-Whitewater. So thank you for your time and consideration this evening.
Thank you. Mr. Heinzen, please.
Sure, thanks. I appreciate that. And so you know the Ice Age Trail reasonably well in the Verona area. So from where it, I guess, ends at Woods Road, coming across from the university, University Ridge. So from that spot on Woods Road until approximately Midtown and Shady Oak Lane. Is there any section of the Ice Age Trail yet, I guess, blazed through that section?
Between Midtown and Woods Road, there is no current Ice Age Trail. We the Ice Age Trail Alliance, do own a property just off of Midtown Road. And then, of course, north of Midtown, there is a segment of Ice Age Trail.
Sure. And do you know what, if any, efforts have been made by, I guess, anyone who works with the Ice Age Trail to acquire rights for access or to create the trail anywhere between Woods and Midtown?
I can tell you there have been overtures to landowners in the past. It's ebbs and flows, and I don't want to provide any information that might put any of those landowners in a pickle. But we have discussed this off and on with various landowners, including one of the landowners who donated a portion, about 10 acres, in the middle of this area to the city of Madison.
Okay. And just one last question, I guess, for you. Where the Ice Age Trail could go across the property, or some of the property in the Northwest Neighborhood Plan, are you aware of any efforts to then continue that trail beyond the Northwest neighborhood, like acquire it
to the north,
in order to keep it moving up towards Midtown? Is that something that is already on somebody's radar to start acquiring?
Yeah, we work with a myriad of partners: National Park Service, DNR, City of Madison, Dane County, of course the city and the town of Verona as well, and of course the landowners, the most important folks in that area. And we do negotiate with each one of those individually. There's several of them that would have to be contacted to get to that point where you can go road to road. Yeah. We have talked to some more recently than others, and all of them, I would say, in the last 5 years or 6 years have been talked to. Until we get to a point in this planning process where we think we're comfortable talking to those next landowners, we probably won't have additional conversations until we're comfortable.
All right, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak?
Hello, my name is Jeffrey Borman, and I live at 3006 Shady Oak Lane with my wife, Tricia, and our 2 daughters. And this is, I think, probably the 3rd meeting I've come to, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you. And I guess the reason I keep coming back is because I've been empowered and I've been excited by the fact that you've listened to other residents when they've been confronted with these dramatic changes in the land use around their homes and around their properties. And you've listened very thoughtfully and come back and changed those plans in many instances that I've witnessed here in these meetings. And I just wanted to tell you from a personal standpoint how this affects me. We have a property of 13 acres that would overlook this commercial development. We now overlook acres and acres of farmland. And we have a beautiful view from our home. We pay $20,000 a year in taxes. We have other neighbors who we've heard about already today who live on Woods Road who are opposed to this. We have a driving range, a golf driving range. Those folks are opposed to this. You've heard from our other neighbors on Shady Oak Lane who are opposed to this. No one wants this. It's a small rural church, as one of the previous speakers told you about. Other than that, there are small properties on multiple acre lots. I think one other person mentioned that this might be a good development plan that would be consistent with the land usage in the area already to build other homes like are being built now and are selling very well. Sherry Lessing has the Watchtower Hill, or whatever she's calling it, up the road on Shady Oak that she's selling properties quite effectively. It could be a much better land use than me and my family looking out at a mixed-use rural or urban development in our front yard, literally. We're very much opposed to this, and I think all of the neighbors in that community who would be exposed to this kind of blight, personally speaking, on our view, are also opposed to this. It's just inconsistent with what the neighborhood and the community are like there, and I'd really urge you to vote against this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Joe Tucker. I live at 3020 Shady Oak Lane in the town. Thank you for listening once again as we give our concerns and suggestions about development of our neighborhood. I have a couple of questions about the plan content related to city services. One of the very few changes the city made in the newer version of the plan was to state that land above elevation 1050 cannot be served by the city's central pressure zone. I also heard Adam Sayer say after the joint planning meeting the other day that it is way too expensive for the city to provide services to the moraine properties. Of the 732 acres, about 300 acres is above elevation 1050. And quite a few of the parcels on the moraine ridge are at elevations very much above 1050. Who gets city services and who doesn't? It's very unclear to me from the plan. At the same time, one of the figures in the plan, figure 7-2, is titled the Water System Master Plan. And on that figure, I see 8 and 12-inch water lines on moraine ridge properties owned by the Cowlings, Dykmans, and Kurlicks. And those are labeled Legends Edge Development water lines. So it's a bit confusing, and I would appreciate having some clarification about, number one, how extensive the Legends Edge development is actually proposed to be, and number two, exactly what properties within the neighborhood would and wouldn't receive city services. Regarding the newer version of the plan, I find it both strange and disturbing that there is so little change from the last version. Residents and neighbors and town government expressed many concerns and suggestions in the public meetings. Yet after comparing the older and newer versions of the plan, you can count on both hands. It's less than a dozen changes from one document to the next, and most are very insignificant. There's a brief statement now acknowledging that the Ice Age Trail should be present, but there's still no specificity at all, and I can't find any depiction on any figure of a corridor that would be suitable for this feature. I suggest you work with the Ice Age Trail Alliance and residents and the town about developing the type of corridor the trail should have through this area before moving this plan forward. With regard to densities and lot sizes and building heights, you just removed those references from the plan and said you would deal with that later. I concur with many who have said we should use minimum 2-acre lot sizes in this area. It would be very consistent with the rural character of the area. But your figures still show dense development in those areas. So I suggest also that you review the previous comments and those you hear tonight and truly try to address them. Last, please don't rush. It's not required that the city and town governments and residents create or meet artificial deadlines and schedules to move a development ahead. Give serious consideration to the opinions of residents and go back to the guiding principles expressed in the Dane County planning documents, which are farmland preservation, parks and open space, urban service areas, and environmental corridors. I ask you not to recommend adoption of this plan. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name's Kurt Ahrens. I'm a resident in the town of Verona, 7433 Rolling Meadow Road, north of off of Shady Oak, basically, and a former city resident off of Meadowside Road, which was spoke about a little earlier. I really am against the rush, as is stated earlier, and encourage looking at those boundary agreements that we did have as a town versus city, It's beautiful land out there. We should preserve as much of it as we can while expanding. I realize that. As a former city resident, I'm kind of wondering why the focus has gone over there when we have a whole west corridor out Main Street and out to the west where the new high school is going to go, and there's property apparently out there that would more serve keeping the desired people coming to Verona. You want to have people in Verona, and to have that satellite development up there makes no sense to me. It's just drawing things away from everything else you're trying to do and keep as a city core. And I just encourage you to review that very thoroughly, both with your current desire to keep the town of Verona, or the city of Verona, vibrant, and you're just going to dilute it, is my comments. So that's all I have.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak?
Good evening. My name is Melissa, and I'd like to introduce you to my husband, Ken Kurlak. We are longtime residents of the town of Verona. Our kids went to Verona High School. We enjoyed raising our children in Verona immensely. We're thrilled to be here today, and thank you for your consideration.
Melissa, could you provide your address, please?
Sure, sorry. 3010 Shady Oak Lane, Verona. For those of you that are new to Legends Edge, we've been working to develop these lands for the last 10+ years with our immediate neighbors on the Cowling property and the Dykeman property. We've had feasibility studies going back to 2011 that have been updated year to year. We took a long-term view and have spent a lot of time analyzing the highest and best use of not only our land, but the adjacent lands that have been in the works for looking at development for a very, very long time. We've listened to neighbors, planning commission members, alders, the words of the town, Mark, and everybody seems to be in agreement that this will be developed sometime. We've been waiting a long, long time, and we think that it should be moving forward now. We have waited for the boundary agreement between the City of Madison and the City of Verona to be terminated by Verona in 2015. We've waited for this town of Verona and the City of Verona to complete their boundary agreement. We came to you over a year ago with our concept plan, just studying what would be the best development that could be in this area now that the new road system between Epic and the lands to the north are in. We agree, we believe that having land uses, densities, and buildings heights in the Northwest Neighborhood Plan would be a good thing moving forward. And we request that you go back to the neighborhood plan draft that was originally submitted by city staff and Jason some time ago. The comment on the North Neighborhood Plan in meeting and speaking with city staff as short as 2 weeks ago, Adam reconfirmed that there's not been a market feasibility study done for the North Neighborhood Plan already been approved for quite some time yet. 732 acres is a huge amount of land to be able to do feasibility studies on. We've focused our efforts on 211 acres, which we've grown together with our neighbors to be the future of Legends Edge. So basically, we've got a gravel pit to the south, we've got Madison to the east, we've got Madison soon to be to the north, and we just want to tuck the development in under the tree line and preserve as much green space as we can, and make sure that the parking is hidden away from public as best we can. So that is why we are proposing the densities, the building heights, to be able to make it all work. So thank you so much for your time.
Question for Ken or Melissa? I just have one question. A couple of the speakers mentioned the Ice Age Trail. And I'm just wondering if you want to speak to that issue of the Ice Age Trail and what your thoughts are.
We have no adversity to that connection. In fact, we feel it to be a pretty important complement to what we're trying to do, and are more than willing to work with not only ourselves but the other landowners to make something that is usable to everybody in the community, including the people to the north, the Hawks that want to be able to get on a trail and perhaps ride their bike to our development, or ride our bike into Verona to enjoy that experience. There's never been an adversity or a not in my backyard, but we want to work with them to plan something that is usable.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else wishing to speak?
Good evening. My name is Charles Dykeman, and I live at 4611 Tanyawatha Trail in the city of Monona with my wife, Bonnie. We own 40 acres, which has been in the extended family since the 1950s. It's across from the terminus of the Ice Age Trail as it now exists through the golf course. I'd like to comment, I think, briefly on something that's been said quite a little bit, and that is the boundary agreement that exists. And it strikes me that this is not so much a question of legality. If it were, and these were two businesses, and one of the businesses was saying, wait a minute, you agreed that you wouldn't develop here until a certain time later, and you'd use A, there'd be a lawsuit about that. But that isn't the way it is. And so I think it's a question of what I guess is called business ethics or business morality. Is there such a thing as the boundary agreement? If indeed it doesn't make any difference whether you're in A, B, or C, because everything will be looked at individually, there really isn't much of a need for a boundary agreement. Secondly, I've tried to wonder and think about why do this? What is the city going to gain from what really is, I think I've described it as a balloon on a string. This is nowhere near the present city services, and it doesn't seem like there's any real reason to do that. Now, I've thought about it as a question of expanding the tax base, but there's going to be some large expenses to this that go along with expanding the base, and there's been some recent developments, I think within the last 2 or 3 weeks. There's been another case there's a name for it, I call it a black hole, in which business establishments will contest their assessments and are winning. It's kind of an unusual argument, but it's a winning argument in both the Dane County Circuit Courts and in the Supreme Court. So I don't see why that's not going to continue. So that the benefit that the city would receive from an expanded tax base is not going to be, I don't think, is going to be what everybody might think it's going to be. And indeed, what this does is to shift the tax burden from the businesses and the places that are able to make this argument to the residents of the city of Verona. So to me, I wonder why would you do a thing like this when there doesn't seem to be any reason or need for it? I think that I've spoken before, and I continue to believe that that there's no reason. Our land is above that level and is not developable for 20 years, and it's probably unlikely that I'm going to be here in 20 years. We have no children, and we've used it for what it is, and that is some deer hunting when I was willing to climb a tree, and turkey hunting, just general going out and looking at the scenery and being in nature. And I don't see that that's going to change a bit anymore. So I'm asking that you reject, that you recommend to the city council that they reject this neighborhood plan. It isn't that there shouldn't be a neighborhood plan, but it should be one that brings in all the neighbors. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Thank you.
Hello, I'm Loveday Hurling, 4033 Barlow Road, Cross Plains, Wisconsin. I represent my family, who are property owners on Woods Road. That would be the Cowling property. This land was purchased by my grandparents in the 70s as an investment. We are in favor of the uses on our land in the plan and ask that you send the plan to Common Council with recommendation of approval. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak?
My name is Tom Durst, 7313 Schaller Road, Verona. My brother and I own 480 acres in the southern part of the township. This will have absolutely no impact on us whatsoever, except it brings up the big question of fairness. We've argued with Mr. Gellner, Mr. Maxwell, and it's the exact reason why we're taking our land in the town of Verona out of farmland preservation because we feel it would hamstring our heirs in the event of an untimely death or something like that, injury, where we can no longer farm. And we view this, I shouldn't speak for my brother, I view this as fairness to everyone. We view it a lot as we are unpaid for green space. And I don't honestly have an opinion on whether you guys should do this project or not. I personally think Verona should develop to the northwest and the southeast and not come our way. I just think that's just the way the land lays and stuff like that. But it still brings back to that question to me, is how would I be treated if I walked in here and said, hey, I want you guys to annex me somehow. We hooked it up and said, I want you to annex me for a 2-acre lot system or something like that. And I would want to be treated fairly, and I'm just not so sure I would be. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak? Mr. Heinzen.
Sure. Just to make sure that I understand what your point is that it would be too difficult to have your property annexed into the city. I just want to make sure in what way do you think you would be treated unfairly? I'm just trying to get my head around that.
What way I think I'd be treated right now, as the current land use plan is in the town of Verona, we have set, at the very moment, they're changing it, which is greatly appreciated by us, that we are sitting at 1 lot per 40 acres, 1 to 35. By going out of the farmland preservation, we can lower that to about 1 to 8. If I understand the rules right, maybe I'm wrong on that, but we're still south of the Sugar River and stuff like that, and you guys aren't coming our direction for some time.
So is the point that you own the property, it's private property, you would like to be able to use your property in the best way you think it should be used?
Correct. Okay. And right now it's that circle you guys get to I don't know what you guys call it, territorial circle that you have, which part of our property is within that you could veto what we do. That's where my issue arises.
All right, thank you.
That veto that you guys could put on me.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
I don't see any. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Sarah Schmid. My address is 2109 Schmid Lane in Verona. I've come before you today just to say that that I manage the Verona Meadows Golf Driving Range for my parents. I've come to every meeting and brought my mom with me. I'm standing before you just to plead our case. All the neighbors have signed petitions saying no to this development, that they don't want this type of development in our neighborhood. One family has suggested it and everyone else is against it. As I've come to each meeting, neighbor after neighbor has stood before you explaining why they don't want it. Please keep the City of Verona businesses in their designated areas. As for the Epic employees, I get a lot of customers that work at Epic. They usually come in and they make a comment that they live right over, and then they mention Epic. They don't want to live close to Epic. Most of them are 25 years old, maybe up until like 35. Just a few of them are at that age. They want to live downtown. There's a few of them that live in Mount Horeb. They don't want to live near their jobs. They want to be where the action is. And anyway, as far as the height requirement and the density, I really haven't heard anything about that. I know that, that was a big factor in my dad's letter to you. We don't feel that this type of development should be located where it is. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak?
Good evening. My name is Tom Mathias. I live in the town of Verona off of Shady Oak Lane, about 1 mile north of the proposed Northwest neighborhood. Tonight I'll comment on increased traffic, which would probably be the primary impact that this proposed neighborhood would have on the north end of Shady Oak Lane. I will also discuss 2 general concerns, as well as concerns about the environment affecting both the city and the town. Finally, I will talk more about the agreement between the city, about the boundary agreement between the city and the town. I'll begin each topic with a specific suggestion. So for traffic, my suggestion for the draft plan is to include a range indicating the traffic that would be generated by new development which may occur under the draft plan. It may not be possible to perform a traffic impact analysis at this time, but there is a standard guide for estimating numbers of new trips generated by new development. For example, a single-family home generates 10 trips per day. An apartment generates 6.1 trips per day. A hotel room generates 10.5 trips per day. A supermarket generates 125 trips per day per 1,000 square feet. These are estimates, and it's a standard guide. So on page 10, under Verona Area School District, the draft plan says, this plan anticipates 1,300 to 3,000 new residential dwelling units within the planning area, of which perhaps 55% will be apartments. So using the middle of this range, along with the standard estimates, that gives an estimate of 17,000 new trips per day based on these new dwelling units. The Legends Edge concept discusses numbers for hotel rooms, supermarket space, and commercial retail space. Using these numbers with the standard estimates gives an additional 23,000 new trips per day. Combined, the 2 numbers give an estimated total of 40,000 new trips per day. The number would be lower if trips are subtracted due to having a walkable neighborhood. But the number would be higher if the estimate included commercial development outside of the discussed Legends and Edge concept. A percentage of these 40,000 new trips per day would traverse Shady Oak Lane and could double or triple or more the daily traffic on this road. Planners, of course, could produce better estimates than I have, and including an estimate on new trips would help people evaluate the plan. My second suggestion is a general suggestion, and that is to defer planning the Northwest neighborhood until natural growth of the city approaches this area. The City of Verona's comprehensive plan states in Chapter 8, Land Use, as in the past, the city believes that new urban development should be allowed only through gradual outward expansion of the existing urban area at the developing edge of the city, rather than through leapfrog development that jumps over undeveloped land to allow development and urbanization beyond undeveloped areas. Last year, the city and town signed a boundary agreement which states the city's vision is to build in a relatively compact urban fashion while supporting its downtown and promoting infill and redevelopment. The boundary agreement identifies 4 types of planning areas in the town. For Area A, the boundary agreement states, Area A is designated as the primary growth area of the city in the town for the term of this agreement. The proposed Northwest neighborhood is not at the developing edge of the city and is not in the agreed primary growth area. The lot identified for the Legends Edge concept is not adjacent to a city lot. The only connection would be a finger of land used for the intersection of County Highway PD and North 9 Mound Road. Deferring planning of this area would be following what the city states in its comprehensive plan and in its agreement with the town. My third suggestion is also a general suggestion, that is to make the planning process transparent by releasing all correspondence, emails, text messages, and other records related to the draft plan. The City of Verona's comprehensive plan states, "The fundamental idea underlying all land use regulations in the state of Wisconsin, including the land use chapter of the City of Verona's comprehensive plan, is that how the land will be used, down to the level of specific and individual pieces of land, is to be determined by the community at large, rather than by the owner of any particular piece of land." The city's 2010 comprehensive plan estimates residential, business, and governmental land usage for 20 years. The comprehensive plan says that 3,900 additional acres will be needed by the year 2030 to accommodate this projected growth. The comprehensive plan identifies growth areas that meet the 3,900 acre target. And the goals of this comprehensive plan were developed by the community. Looking at the draft plan, the background section on page 4 says, "This neighborhood plan anticipates development pressure spurred by the growth of the city and is intended to guide and coordinate any development that occurs." The goal of the draft plan is to manage anticipated development pressure, but the draft plan does not state the nature of this development pressure. How can the draft plan be evaluated without knowing this goal? In contrast to the comprehensive plan, the goal of the draft plan was not developed by the community. Apparently, the draft plan is designed to address some unspecified needs which are not met by the comprehensive plan. If the comprehensive plan does not adequately address anticipated development pressure, then the first step would seem to be to correct the deficiencies in the comprehensive plan, achieving community consensus on the issues that need to be addressed. After the comprehensive plan is updated, a draft neighborhood plan could then be evaluated in terms of how well it meets the goals identified in the updated comprehensive plan. Transparency is needed to achieve community agreement on what needs to be changed in the comprehensive plan. Transparency is also needed to explain the inclusion of the map at the bottom of page 11 of the draft plan. This map is titled Recommended Water System Master Plan, and as mentioned earlier, this map uses blue dotted lines to identify Legends Edge Development 8-inch water main placement and green dotted lines to identify Legends Edge Development 12-inch water main placement. It seems surprising for a draft neighborhood plan to include a map that identifies a specific development concept. Releasing the records related to the planning process will explain the inclusion of this map. My fourth suggestion is related to the environment. Increase the stormwater management annual average stay-on from 90% to 100%. The draft plan on page 10 under Stormwater Management and Quality says, with regard to infiltration, current county standards, which exceed state standards, require that provisions be incorporated to achieve at least 90% of the annual average stay-on as compared to existing conditions, regardless of development type. A 100% stay-on would mean that at least the same amount of rainfall would stay on site compared to the pre-development stay-on. Therefore, the amount of runoff would not be projected to increase. A 90% stay-on allows the runoff to increase, resulting in an increased flow in Badger Mill Creek. At the July Town Board meeting, a farmer who farms along Badger Mill Creek south of Verona reported more frequent flooding of Badger Mill Creek, possibly due to inadequate stormwater management. In November, the Wisconsin DNR proposed adding Badger Mill Creek to its 2018 impaired waters list due to phosphorus pollution. In May of this year, the Stormwater Technical Advisory Committee, formed by the Dane County Lakes and Watershed Commission and CARPC, made a recommendation to require countywide that new development not increase stormwater runoff volumes above pre-development levels, 100% volume control. That committee report says that the City of Verona agreed to 100% stay-on for Area N and Area S of the city's 2016 Urban Service Area Amendment. The report cites additional communities adopting the 100% stay-on standard and says the ensuing development in these areas has helped to demonstrate the feasibility of meeting a volume control standard equal to 100% of pre-development conditions. The state of Badger Mill Creek expert opinion and the city's previous adoption of 100% stay-on are strong signs to apply the same standard to the proposed Northwest neighborhood. My next suggestion for the environment is to specify that converted wetlands will be restored. The city's southeast and southwest neighborhood plans both say that converted wetlands will be restored and make the case that wetlands protection and water quality may be improved once those neighborhoods are urbanized. The draft Northwest Neighborhood Plan on page 6 under natural areas says, agricultural practices also likely eliminated wetlands that may have existed in the area. However, the draft plan does not mention the restoration of converted wetlands and does not require developers to attempt to identify these areas. If no one looks for converted wetlands, then the opportunity to restore them will be lost. My next suggestion for the environment is to prioritize the preservation of woodlands in the area. The Southeast Neighborhood Plan states, wooded areas and steep slopes are planned to be preserved through the city's parkland dedication requirements and subsequently utilized for city park purposes. Additionally, those wooded areas which remain after parkland dedication requirements are satisfied may be incorporated into residential subdivisions as part of the overall subdivision design. The draft Northwest Neighborhood Plan does not include a similar provision for the preservation of wooded areas. The North Neighborhood Plan contains woodlands within its central planning area. The land use plan for the North Neighborhood transitions to these wooded areas by using suburban residential land use and does not locate commercial mixed use next to woodlands. In contrast, the draft Northwest Neighborhood Plan proposes commercial mixed use development for land adjacent to and within woodlands. The draft plan also proposes medium density residential development for land adjacent to and within woodlands. Development adjacent to woodlands impacts wildlife within the woodlands. One example of this is the Acadian flycatcher, which is described in the city's Badger Mill Creek Sugar River Area Study, which says, the study area does not contain any large woodland areas greater than 40 to 80 acres, which is the nesting habit required by this species. However, potentially suitable habitat is located immediately to the east of the study area. A development plan that includes wildlife corridors and maintains woodlands on steep slopes will be compatible with protection of this species. The Acadian flycatcher is a threatened species in Wisconsin. The DNR species guidance document for this bird says, Acadian flycatcher's largest threat is fragmentation and loss of existing large patches of mature deciduous forest. The amount of urban development within 1 kilometer of forest stands has an especially negative impact on Acadian flycatcher occupancy. As far as I know, the woodlands in the planning area have not been surveyed for threatened or endangered species, so we don't know if this particular bird is found in the proposed Northwest Neighborhood. However, this example shows that what happens outside of woodlands does not stay outside of Woodlands. My last two suggestions relate to the boundary agreement. First is to preserve the natural character of the Ice Age Trail. The boundary agreement says the desired corridors will be generous in width and will retain a rural, natural character through or around any proposed development. A similar statement is in the draft plan, which says a generous buffer around the Ice Age Trail is recommended to preserve the rural character of the trail when possible. Note that the draft plan talks about the rural character, but it omits the word natural. This omission might not be intentional, but going back again to the recommended water system plan map on page 11, that suggests that the draft plan does not commit to providing a natural character for the Ice Age Trail. In fact, the map shows the future northwest water tower is located directly in the proposed Ice Age Trail corridor. Constructing a water tower in the Ice Age Trail corridor would be inconsistent with a boundary agreement. My last suggestion is to include the definition of urban development in Area B that is found in the boundary agreement. The proposed northwest neighborhood is in Area B of the boundary agreement. For this area, the boundary agreement says, the town and city agree that the territory located in Area B is an area in which full urban development may occur under the provisions of this agreement. The parties acknowledge that all of the land within Area B is not likely to be developed at urban densities within the term of this agreement, but may be developed in the future. Let me repeat that. Area B is an area in which full urban development may occur under the provisions of this agreement. The agreement defines urban development in Section 6, definitions. Urban development means development similar in character, intensity, and use to what is currently found in the city of Verona. It may include residential, commercial, and/or industrial uses, and is typically served by the full range of public services, including municipal sewer and water. The city and town have agreed that urban development in Area B would be similar to what is currently found in the city. Under the boundary agreement, urban development that differs in character, intensity, or use will not be located in Area B. Note that Area A is described differently and is not constrained by the definition of urban development. The boundary agreement makes a clear distinction between Area A and Area B. In summary, not enough information has been provided about estimates of increased traffic, the goals of the draft plan, and any deficiencies in the city's current comprehensive plan. The draft plan has lower environmental standards than the city's plans for the north, southeast, and southwest neighborhoods. Finally, the draft plan is inconsistent with the city's previous statements and the boundary agreement in terms of timing of development and the type of development allowed for this proposed neighborhood. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that wishes to speak? Anyone else that wishes to speak? On the third and final time, not seeing anyone, I would accept the motion to close the I'm sorry.
Hi, gentlemen. It's good to see you again tonight. My name's Meredith Steer Christensen. As you know, I'm here for a different reason, but I'm listening to all my neighbors voice their opinions, and I felt it was I wasn't doing justice if I was sitting there silently sharing their opinions without sharing them with you publicly. I think that there was a comment raised about the fairness of development, and while I believe that people should have the ability to develop their property as they see fit, the boundary agreement that was entered into provided a plan for fair and predictable development, and it seems that this particular agreement is not in keeping with the type of development that the boundary agreement foresaw. So I would like to add my voice to those of my neighbors. I would like to echo what Judge Dykeman said, if we're not going to follow a boundary agreement, why have it? but both municipalities entered into this agreement so we could have predictable growth that was fair for both municipalities. I would just ask that you take a look at that and see if we are in keeping with those agreement provisions. So thank you so much.
Anyone else wishing to speak? Not seeing anyone else, I would accept the motion to close the public hearing. We have a motion by Mr. Manley. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Horsfall. All those in favor of closing the public hearing signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Motion carried. Public hearing has concluded. Mr. Sayre, please.
I have nothing else to add unless you'd like me to address some of the questions.
If you would, address some of the questions and concerns.
I will do my best to get through these, so please jump in if I'm missing some or if I didn't take proper notes. I think one of the questions was regarding the pressure zone and service of water service. So on page 11 of the plan, and I'll try to zoom in here because you can't see that. So page 11 of the plan is actually an excerpt from the city's water master plan. I think it was referenced by a couple speakers tonight. And the planning area is divided into two pressure zones. The brownish kind of area on the screen is the central pressure zone. That is generally the central part of the city. It also is served by the Epic well and reservoir, which is right here on the map as well. And then we have this purple area as well, which I think is the reference to 1050. But the purple area would be a new pressure zone for the city. It's above the elevation that is required to serve that from a water pressure standpoint. I think from a cost standpoint, my comments on this in the past is any requirement for anyone to run these utilities would be a developer expense. So to potentially serve development in this area, there would need to be what's called a booster station constructed to boost the water pressure to that zone. And then ultimately, as development, if it were to continue up Woods Road, it would take the water tower that was mentioned, and the water tower would be up on most likely the Dykeman property, since that's the highest elevation in the area. The question of who gets city services and who doesn't get city services, that's typically a question more for the property owner. So if there are municipal services available to those properties, it's a question for the property owner if they choose to hook into those services. Typically in the past, the city has not required those connections. Typically those connections occur when wells and septics begin to fail, and it becomes a cost issue at that point. Also typically when people hook into those services after the fact, there typically are special assessments associated with that because ultimately someone had to pay to run the water and sewer to those areas, so there are special charges that are potentially applied to those properties, and that includes city charges, charges from MMSD, which is the sewage district, and also charges as well from the Regional Planning Commission to bring the property into the urban service area. I guess what are other comments as I'm scrolling through these that does the Planning Commission have?
Just a question for you, Adam, if that's okay. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. With respect to the municipal services, if I'm gathering what you had to say is that it's a matter of physics at one level. There is a portion of the property here that cannot be served without special, I'm going to guess, I mean, it could be served somehow, but above and beyond what the city would typically do with a water tower.
Mr. Sayre?
Correct. So I mean, the purple area is that area that would be a new pressure zone for the city. The maroon area, and I actually think this map from the water master plan actually is not accurate, but the maroon area could not be or the brownish maroon area could be served by the central zone. Part of the basis for setting up that boundary agreement with that area B as well, the reason that is delineated as it is those are areas that we could serve. And that was kind of predicated off the water master plan that was initially done here in 2015. As we looked at the boundary agreement with the town, that kind of what's in the water plan here actually goes to Timber Lane. It wasn't accurate the more we looked at it as part of that boundary agreement, and that's why it got pulled back to where we think we possibly could serve. And I know there is a different map in this in the plan. I don't know which page it's on off the top of my head, but there are some properties potentially out in this western part as well, which are probably questionable from a water standpoint as well. We get into some higher elevations there, and that would take a more detailed analysis in those areas if we could possibly serve those or not.
Go ahead, Mr. Sarr.
I think regarding a couple other points, I think on traffic, we haven't done traffic impact analysis with at the planning level. We typically handle those on a development by development basis. So for example, we just recently completed one for the Liberty Park and the Verona Technology Park area, and that was one that was completed as part of a TIF analysis, as part of a TIF project actually in that area. I believe a developer is working on one potentially for the North Neighborhood development. So as we know what the development's going to be, that would be required. I know there's been a lot of specific comments tonight regarding the Legends Edge project. I think that's this plan, as I've said before, potentially accommodates that project. But those types of details and questions, we handle those at the level of development, and that project from a plan standpoint isn't there at this time, and that's typically how we've done that in the past as well too.
Other concerns that were mentioned?
I think just a couple more regarding a market analysis. Once again, typically we don't do a market analysis to look at the uses to see what is supported and what's not. So that has not been done with our previous plans as well. Regarding potential 2 or 3 acre lots, I think if that's the direction the Plan Commission and Council would want to go in this plan, it begs the question ultimately, is it viable and feasible for city services to be extended to these areas? Ultimately, from a cost standpoint, it comes in the question is it cost effective and efficient for the city or for those utilities to be run to those areas and ultimately long-term maintained by the city. So that, I guess, is as the Planning Commission considers that comment, keep that in mind as development happens in the city. There's part of the reason that drives that is there is a high cost for running those utilities, that water and sewer. Which ones am I missing to the Plan Commission?
The comment about developing an A first, then moving to B.
Sure. So there's 2 different areas in here, and it says you have Area A, which is city growth area. Area A is designated as the primary growth area for the city in the town for the term of this agreement. The parties acknowledge the territory within the city growth area is likely to be developed with comprehensive urban services, including but not limited to sanitary sewers and municipal water, in conformance with the city's comprehensive plan. This area shall be regulated by the town in a fashion which will avoid conflicts with future urban development. The city and the town and the city agree to the following provisions, and that goes through, talks about when land divisions are requested and etc. Area B is the town, and it's a city-town interest area. The town and city agree that the territory located in Area B is an area in which full urban development may occur under the provisions of this agreement. The parties acknowledge that all the land within Area B is not likely to be developed at urban densities within the term of this agreement, but may be developed in the future. While this area is designated for potential future city growth, Interim and long-term town development that does not conflict with city expansion may be permitted, and the town and city agree to the following provisions applicable to Area B, which I won't go into, but are similar to those of Area A. And that's from the boundary agreement, obviously.
Are there other questions that the Plan Commission members have? Mr. Manley, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you to everybody who spoke tonight. A lot of good input. It's always helpful for us as Plan Commission members to hear a diverse set of points of view. I guess I'll start with the question about the boundary agreement, because there seems to be some concern that the neighborhood plan that's before us is inconsistent with the boundary agreement. And I wasn't a part of the negotiation of the boundary agreement, but I've read it, and I think I understand it. And my reading of it is that this particular neighborhood plan, and that's what's before us, is a neighborhood plan, not a development project. I think there's a lot of folks who are sort of conflating the two of them, and you know, as a matter of what we're reviewing here tonight, it isn't a development plan. That may or may not get approved at some point in the future. That's ultimately going to be a completely separate policy decision. What's before us this evening is a neighborhood plan. And my reading of the boundary agreement is that this neighborhood plan is consistent with the boundary agreement, but I guess I would ask staff or the mayor if you're aware whether our city attorney has reviewed the neighborhood plan, and whether or not I'm assuming that if the city attorney has done that, that any concern with respect to whether it's compatible with the boundary agreement would have been raised. Is that accurate?
Mr. Sarah?
The city attorney has not reviewed the details of the plan. The city attorney is fully aware that we are in the process of doing this plan. He has not raised that concern to me at all. I think if I asked him his opinion, I would suspect he would say the creation of a plan is consistent with the boundary agreement. That's something that's within the provisions of the city and something that we can do. I think the reality to that too is right now the town is going through a comprehensive plan rewrite as well. I think the agreement doesn't prohibit the town from planning areas in A or B or C or town neighborhoods as well too. So I think it kind of goes both ways, where both communities have, you know, under the agreement, in my opinion, would have absolutely no question the right to do it. I think it ultimately is more subjective of, you know, how those plans come together, and is there a way to bring them together is probably more the bigger, broader question. But without asking him his opinion, I would be shocked if he said that this is something we could not do, because he is aware we're doing it and hasn't raised that issue at all.
Mr. Manley? Thank you. Okay. Other questions or comments? Jason, anything that you wanted to add?
Just a couple of comments, follow-ups on things that have already come up. The question of the maps on page 11 that describe the water system. I think it's good to point out and clarify that those maps are for informational purposes, and they reflect a technical study that the city completed to evaluate the feasibility of water service. And their function in this plan, they are part of the existing conditions portion. Their function in this plan is to help us determine and to help future developers and property owners determine what's feasible. They do not reflect policy about you know, whether or not development should occur. The consultant in this case was asked the question, if development were to occur, what's possible? And these maps reflect the answer to that question. The other thing that I would point out is with regard to the neighborhood, the boundary agreement, really to concur with what Adam has said, that I think this plan is consistent with the boundary agreement. The boundary agreement is clear, and I think the participants were clear in making that agreement that this is an area that will be developed in an urban fashion. And it becomes then a question of when. And the agreement doesn't say when. It makes a guess that it's going to be later than sooner, but it doesn't set policy as to when. And it does indicate that a portion of that Area B is expected to develop, or certainly could develop during the period of the agreement. The portion of Area B that is within this proposed neighborhood plan is, I would say, about 25% of Area B. And so there are significant other lands in other parts of the town that are also part of Area B. So I think that also merits pointing out.
Thank you. Questions, comments? Mr. Horsfeld, please.
So currently in the city of Verona, we have certain limits on density and mixed use and stuff like that. So if we were to carry through what the boundary agreement had talked about of matching what the current city has, is that stated in the Northwest Plan, or is it silent on it and kind of drawing back to the boundary to control whatever density we go?
Mr. Valerius?
Sure, I'll take the first crack at that and say that I concur that that language is in the plan, in the boundary agreement, and we didn't reflect that same language in the plan. But the boundary agreement does state that that definition for urban development.
And a follow-up to that, is there a hierarchy with boundary agreement and neighborhood plan, or, as someone pointed out, it doesn't really matter one way or the other, these are just planning guidelines to us?
Mr. Sayre?
I think, generally speaking, and Jason, correct me, I think it's tended to be a guideline. I mean, there were conversations about looking at, especially looking at lot sizes in the town as part of our discussions, and we started getting very deep into what should and shouldn't be in that agreement. That's definitely something that could have been included in there, but I think it was trying to not be as prescriptive as it could have been when it comes to lot sizes, and I would imagine the opposite would be true as well of densities and intensities as city development too. So to kind of your point of, the language, I think in the agreement is general when it talks about urban development means development similar in character, intensity, and use what is currently found in the city of Verona. I mean, as you've been here long enough, I mean, we see enough projects, enough variety that, the density that you may have in the West End or even Sugar Creek Commons is, 20, 30 DUs per acre. So, I mean, it varies. I mean, it varies anywhere, even in the city as well.
Other questions, comments, potential motions? Again, if there would be a motion, it would be a recommendation to the Common Council. Question, Mr. Heinzen?
Sure. I think, Scott, you had a really important point, which is what we're here tonight to do is to look at the neighborhood plan, and it's not the project plan. But I think it would be helpful, Adam, if you could just sketch out for us each step that would need to be met if we were talking about the project, not just the neighborhood plan.
Mr. Sayre, please.
So any develop in this area would have to meet certain requirements and certain approvals as well. We have what's called a pre-development agreement, which you would have to enter into with the developer. We'd have to have a pre-annexation agreement with any developer. We'd ultimately have to have an urban service area amendment to the Regional Planning Commission. We'd have to submit that application and go through the process that CARPC has established. We'd have to have annexation ultimately to the city. Depending on the size and the scale of the development, there may need to be a traffic impact analysis completed. And then obviously you get into the city approvals as well, which then deals with zoning. If it can't conform to zoning, then you're looking at potential plan development requirements, which is a three-step process with the concept, general development plan, and precise implementation plan as well too. And we'd also have to bring the property into the MMSD service area as well for the sewage district as well too. Ultimately, once the approvals are obtained, then at that point, construction could start. And once again, you're talking an additional developers agreement for the roads, for the utilities, for the public services as well. So for any development in this area, it would take those steps, which is many.
Mr. Heinzen?
Sure, thank you. And what we're looking at tonight is the neighborhood plan, and if we were to, vote in favor of it, it would go to the Common Council for a vote by the Common Council, correct?
Correct.
Yeah. Okay.
What we would be doing is, we would be passing a resolution, the Plan Commission would be passing a resolution adopting and recommending to the Common Council an amendment to the Northwest Neighborhood Plan.
Thanks.
Mr. Sayre?
I'll just point out as well, if it's since there are 4 people here tonight, if it is a tie vote, it would still go to the council, or even if it was a recommendation for denial of the plan, it would still go to the council. So as long as there's a recommendation, regardless of tie votes or directions, it would still go to the council.
Mr. Heinzen?
Sure. If we were inclined to I guess amend what we have here tonight to include both density and height. If that were to carry the day, then that would go to the council in that form. But what would happen if we have a split? And maybe we don't even have to worry about that until we actually take a vote on it.
Mr. Sayre?
I would think a split vote would still go with that recommendation with those conditions in there, or amendments that would be in there. So even if it's split, it'd be a, say 2-2 vote. So with the resolution and those conditions would be attached to the resolution. We had a similar conversation. We did the North Neighborhood Plan, I think, regarding some of the features in there too. And that was kind of the same way, where there were kind of conditions put into that resolution that went to the council ultimately.
Mr. Manley, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to address a couple of issues that were brought up that I thought bear mentioning, and one of them had to do with property taxes and valuation, and the concern that if we bring additional commercial property into our jurisdiction, that it's going to have a negative impact on property taxpayers. And I think it's worth noting that the 2017 data is out on equalized value assessment for Verona. And if you look at the commercial and the manufacturing property in our city, it actually accounts for about 57% of our total. Residential is about 43%. I haven't been in city service nearly as long as the mayor has, but I would bet you, Mayor, that when you started on the city council years ago, that it wasn't 57% commercial and manufacturing and 43% residential. We were weighted much heavier in favor of residential as opposed to commercial.
That's correct.
So I think if, one of the things that we've learned from Epic and the growth of commercial property in our city is that it actually lightens the load on residential taxpayers. And I think we've seen with the closing of TIF 7, we've definitely seen that here at the city and other taxing jurisdictions, including the school district. And we're going to have another item on the agenda tonight that is before us, I think, in large measure because of the financial wherewithal that additional commercial development has brought to our city. So I think it's important for us to keep in mind that the history of commercial development in our city has been one of a positive impact on residential property owners. The other thing that I want to address, and I think it's a legitimate concern, is the environmental impact of development. And it was suggested that we treat this particular part of the city contrary to the stormwater standards that are applicable elsewhere in the city. And I think that I would advise against that. I think it will drive up the cost of development. And if it drives up the cost of development, it's going to drive up the cost of housing in that development. And I don't think that's a good outcome. I think it's worth noting that we as a city, to the extent that we have a 90% infiltration standard, that is a standard that is more stringent than what our environmental regulators have said is necessary to protect surface water quality. And I think it's also worth noting that any runoff that would occur from this site would be treated in multiple stormwater basins before it would enter the Sugar Creek River. I think it's also important to understand that the vast majority of phosphorus loading, and that was brought up as a concern about nutrients in the Sugar River and possibly being impaired. The vast majority of phosphorus loading in surface waters occurs from agricultural uses. And to the extent that I think all of us are concerned about making sure that we have good water quality in our surface waters, switching from an agricultural use to a use where you actually have to treat stormwater as opposed to letting runoff just enter the water body from agricultural land, you're actually going to be doing, you're actually probably going to have a net improvement in water quality in taking land out of agriculture and into developed and treated stormwater runoff. So I just wanted to make that point.
Thank you. Other questions or comments? Questions or comments or motions? I would just like to clarify with Mr. Sayre. Plan Commissioner Heinzen brought up the density and the height. And I don't know if you would like this, but I think I would like to know what we had in for the original language regarding that.
Thank you. Yes, that is what I had intended. I think it was 100 feet and 55 units.
Mr. Sayre has it, so we can read that. Mr. Sayre.
So the map before you is, or on the screen before you, anything highlighted in yellow are things that were changed. This is kind of meant as our kind of changed document that was in your packet. So anything highlighted has been modified in some fashion. And Mr. Valerius can correct me if I'm wrong in anything I say here, but the red area, which is the commercial mixed-use area, in the September plan that was before you, it stated that residential density shall not exceed 15 units per acre and building height shall not exceed 65 feet on a case-by-case basis, and in exchange for high-quality design, parentheses, see design guideline section, the city may allow up to 50 units per acre net and 100 feet in height. We also had language in the medium density residential area, which is the brownish type area, east, north, and west of that reddish area. And that stated, multi-unit buildings shall be no taller than 35 feet on a case-by-case basis in exchange for high-quality design. And once again, see design guideline section. The city may allow up to 18 units per acre net and 65 feet in height. So I believe those were the two references. There also was a reference, I believe, to some potential lot sizes in some of the residential areas as well too. it talked about the low-density suburban residential area. The majority of the low-density residential area will be 8,000 to 20,000 square foot lots, and then it talks about setbacks as well. So that's the references the height and density.
Thank you, Mr. Sarah. Mr. Manley, please.
Thank you. Just a question so that I can make sure that I fully understand what 100 feet, if that was what would be contemplated. Thinking about the character of development that has occurred elsewhere in the city, do we have development that, I know that Epic is probably one of the most intensely developed areas that we have. Are there buildings in Epic that would be at that level?
Mr. Sarah?
I think there may be features on some of those buildings at Epic. So the buildings at Epic, the vast majority are 3 levels. There's, I think, Campus 2. I think they did some 4-story buildings on Campus 2, but the vast majority of the buildings are 3 stories. But they do have a variety of architectural features that, you know, may come close to that height. We haven't pulled that information, so I don't know to be sure of that. I think the one example that Mr. Valerius has provided, there's an office building in Greenway Station. I don't know who's in it. I'm not sure. I don't know if we have that in the plan still or not, that image, but no, we took it out. But there was an image in the previous plans of what there's an office building in Greenway Station that is approximately about 100 feet tall. I think the Trader Joe example, which is on the screen before you, has 5 levels to it. That's probably approximately 60-ish.
Yeah, 65 to 70, I think,
70,
is
okay.
probably what that's at.
Other questions or comments, motions? I'm prepared to make a motion, but before I do, I want to explain what I'm going to do. So it would be my intent to make the motion to approve the resolution as included on the agenda. And if I would have a second to that motion, I would make a second motion to amend the recommendation to include the language that Mr. Sayre just cited. So we would revert back to that original language. So I will make a motion to approve the resolution and recommending the Northwest Neighborhood Plan as an amendment to the City of Verona Comprehensive Plan. I so move. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Seconded by Mr. Heinzen. I will then make a motion to amend the recommendation to include the prior language that Mr. Sayre had just repeated. Mr. Sayre, please.
So just for clarification for staff, you're referring to densities and heights that have been referenced in the commercial mixed-use area, also referenced in the medium-density residential area, and then also in the I think it's low-intensity suburban residential areas.
That is correct. I would move that amendment. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Seconded by Heinzen. We are voting now on the amendment, but we have discussion on the amendment. Mr. Manley, please.
Thank you, Mayor. So would that be, that's not an actual, so I'm clear, you're not proposing an amendment to the resolution itself, you're proposing an amendment to the plan?
I think we'd have to modify the resolution for the city council meeting.
Okay, so that this would be a separate whereas clause? Is that what you're?
Is that how you would handle it, Mr. Sayre?
I'm pulling up the resolution right now. So most likely we would do a whereas the City of Verona Plan Commission has reviewed the Northwest Neighborhood Plan and recommended its approval of City of Verona Common Council with the following conditions, and then we would list off the changes that the mayor referenced in his motion. That would be my intention.
Okay. Thank you.
That's typically how we've done it in the past.
So we're on the amendment. Mr. Horsfeld, please.
So is it changing page 15 and 16. So to be, instead of being silent on density and height, we're
Mr.
gonna,
Sayre?
is that a correct assumption?
So the intention would put the language from the September draft that's on the screen before you, which is the current draft, but it would reference those heights and densities from the September meeting. So that was the language that talks about residential density shall not exceed 15 units per acre and building height shall not exceed 65 feet. On a case-by-case basis, in exchange for higher quality design, see design guidelines section, the city may allow up to 50 units per acre net and 100 feet in height. And then we would do the same thing in the medium density residential section, which talks about multi-unit buildings shall be no taller than 35 feet on a case-by-case basis in exchange for higher quality design, see design guidelines section. The city may allow up to 18 units per acre net and 65 feet in height. And then for the low-density suburban residential, we would insert the language back in that says the majority of the low-density residential area would be 8,000 to 20,000 square foot lots. And the one question that we may need to work on is the language of the design guidelines, I believe, was modified as well. So we may have to reinsert that original language just to match what was there in September. I think that was a change that we did make, Mr. Valerius.
Further questions? Mr. Manley, please.
Okay, thank you. Just so that I'm clear, the language that you're proposing be included with this neighborhood plan is not an entitlement to build for anybody, any property owner in the neighborhood area, to build to a certain height or to a certain density. Any building that would occur would have to be consistent with our zoning code. And if it's not consistent with our zoning code, then they would need to pursue an exemption through a PUD process, correct?
It's my understanding. Mr. Sayre, is that correct?
I would agree with that. I think as you would look at that PUD, ultimately though, you'd look at this document as a guide as you look at that for the consistency purposes of the development with the comprehensive plan. So from that standpoint, you're not technically bound by it, but it puts more certainty in place, I guess, that could happen.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions? Mr. Horsfeld, please.
So alternatively, if we don't have any, or silent on that, then how would a developer interpret the plan?
Mr. Sayre?
So if it's silent, which we do have some neighborhood plans that are somewhat silent, especially the southwest and the southeast plan. We have what's called the transition area, which is kind of open-ended of how land uses transition. So if it is silent, and at that point it would come to you, as a development proposal, you would look at the neighborhood plan, and you would weigh the proposal based upon the plan and also the standards in the ordinance as well too. So you would have, there'd be additional flexibility. I think the downside for ultimately, if it's not in there, it's less certainty, but for both the developer and the public, ultimately.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions or comments on the amendment? Questions or comments on the amendment? Seeing none, Mr. Horsfall.
I'm going to vote against it because I prefer to have it be a little more open-ended, and being silent on the language on height of the buildings and density. I prefer that to be, again, silent like it is currently versus the amendment that way it was in September.
Okay.
So, thanks.
Thank you. Other questions or comments on the amendment? Seeing none, we're voting now on the amendment. All those in favor of the amendment signify by saying aye. 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 Opposed, no? No. And that motion carries. I'm just getting caught up in my notes. So now we are back to the main motion as amended. Questions or comments on the main motion as amended? Questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no? And that motion carries 3-1. So again, I wanted to thank the people that were here this evening, and just so everyone understands, we had public hearing this evening at the Plan Commission. There will not be a public hearing during the City Council meeting on December 18th, but there is public comment early on in the meeting. So if people wish to comment again on this before the City Council, please be here on December 18th. Thank you. We are on agenda item 7, which is discussion and possible action. It would be a recommendation to the Common Council on a certified survey map to create one lot at 660 Hometown Circle. Mr. Sayre, please.
Thank you. The applicant is requesting a certified survey map to create one lot at 660 Hometown Circle. This lot would be for the Festival Foods project. The site that Festival Foods is acquiring is this lot located here, is labeled as Festival Foods, and also a small part of the lot to the east of the site. The CSM is before you. Once again, it's the existing lot along Hometown Circle, and then approximately 100 feet to the east into that parcel as well. As part of the CSM, they will be discontinuing a small portion of the existing Keenan Court. The area hashed here is the area to be vacated, and ultimately they're rededicating the same amount of land to the south, so they're slightly just shifting this to the south. As part of the CSM, the city required that the applicant submit a letter with all property owners who have access to this road to basically sign off on this vacation and rededication. We have received that authorization. So that staff has no concerns with the proposed CSM. Staff recommends the Plan Commission recommend to the Common Council approval of the CSM to create one lot at 660 Hometown Circle. And I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you, Mr. Sayre. Questions or comments? Questions or comments? Are there any motions? Again, it would be a motion to recommend. Mr. Horsfall, please.
At this point, I'd like to recommend to the Common Council approve the certified survey map to create one lot at 660 Hometown Circle.
We have a motion by Mr. Horsfall. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Manley. Questions or comments on the motion? Questions or comments? I'm not seeing any. All those in favor of recommendation of the certified survey map signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. And that motion carries. We are on agenda item number 8, which is discussion and possible action regarding a petition by the Verona Area School District to annex approximately 53.6 acres of land into the city of Verona. The proposed annexation is located in part of the northwest quarter of the southeast quarter and part of the northeast quarter of the southwest quarter of Section 21. If we were to take action, this would be a recommendation to the Common Council. Mr. Sayre, please.
So we have two items on the agenda. I think initially here, this item will tackle the annexation of Stewart's Woods, so if we can just focus discussion on that, that would be appreciated. The school district is requesting to annex what's known as Stewart's Woods. Stewart's Woods is the dashed property located here along 18151. It's the obviously wooded area. The property was previously owned by Wisconsin Department of Transportation. The school district recently purchased this parcel from DOT. And as part of their planning of their high school campus, they're looking at annexing the property. From a plan consistency standpoint, this property has been discussed over the years by both city and the school district. Both parties have identified it previously as a preservation area of the wooded area. So staff feels that the request to annex it to the city is consistent with those past conversations and plans. The proposed annexation would add 53.583 acres of land into the city boundary. The property is currently located within the urban service area, so we would not need to do an urban service area amendment for this request. Wisconsin Department of Administration, DOA, reviewed the proposed annexation on November 1st, 2017 and recommended in favor of the annexation. By state law, the city is required to pay the town of Verona any taxes for this parcel. This parcel was previously owned by the state and then now by the school district, so there are no taxes due on the property. Zoning of the property is established as a rural agricultural. This is consistent with any annexation that occurs in the city. Staff has no concerns with classifying this as an RA zone. The property is wooded, it's mostly vacant, and the potential use of the property for the school uses are consistent and allowed as permitted uses within the RA zoning district. So with that, staff would recommend, the Plan Commission recommend to the Common Council to approve the request to annex 53.583 acres of land to the city of Verona. And I'd be happy to answer any questions, and the school district would be happy to answer any questions as well.
Thank you, Mr. Sayre. Questions or comments, potential action from the Plan Commission members? Comments, questions? I am going to make a motion to recommend approval of the petition by the Verona Area School District to annex approximately 53.6 acres of land into the city of Verona, as described on agenda item number 8. I so move. Second. Seconded by Mr. Manley. Questions or comments on the motion? Mr. Horsfall, please.
So I'm not going to vote for this or provide comments on the other one, because I've always argued that this is not the right spot for the Verona Area School District to build a high school. It's originally, we talked about the last section, or before that, was talking about, the comprehensive plan and everything, and the southwest area was designed to be more for commercial than to have a school on this. And I've always argued that point, so I'm not going to be voting in favor of this. Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions or comments? Questions or comments? I'll just add that a lot of times I speak about issues when I think they're once-in-a-lifetime opportunities, and I think the fact that we can bring Stewart's Woods into the city of Verona and have it be part of the school district, it just adds another amenity to the school district, and I'm fully supportive of doing this. Further questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor of the recommendation to the Common Council signify by saying aye. 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 Opposed, no. Nope. Motion carries 3-1. We are on agenda item number 9, which is discussion and possible action regarding the initial review to allow for the construction of a new high school for the Verona Area School District to be located in the West End, south of West End Circle. Mr. Sayre, please.
Thank you. Once again, this property is located in the what's being known as the West End and also the Urbach properties. So it's the site located along Highway 18-151 and south of West Verona Avenue. Both the Urbach and the West End properties have a long history, which was summarized in our staff report, so I won't go into the history of it, but I'd be happy to if once I get through my report. If you want me to do that, I would. The site itself, the site plan is before you right now. The building itself would be fronting towards West End Circle, towards the northern half of the site. The site encompasses both the former West End property, the former Urbach property, and then also the portion of Stewart's Woods that the district recently acquired. The use itself would be for a new high school that would accommodate up to 2,200 students and is designed to allow for an additional 300 students if necessary. The facility will include an aquatic center, performing arts center, field house, and new athletic facilities. The proposed building is set back approximately 300 feet from West End Circle on the north, and it'd be 400 feet from the west property line, and then 1,200 feet from the eastern property line, and then approximately 2,000 feet from the southern property line. Staff has no concerns with the building setbacks. The applicant has indicated the building height may be up to almost 70 feet tall, and that's due to the theater fly space that's in there. The PI zoning district has a maximum height allowance of 35 feet. So as part of this, the applicant will need to obtain a conditional use permit to exceed the height in the zoning ordinance. Access to the site, the applicant is proposing several access points to the site. We'll kind of go from the northwest around the site. Access would be from Wall Street, at approximately this location. Then people would be able to travel south to the back side of the school, or potentially also to the front of the school. Access would also be from West End Circle. This would also come from the new signalized access point of West Verona Avenue and West End Circle. We'd have a access point coming in from South Nine Mound Road for a new, what they're identifying as Road AA. That would stub into a new road called Road BB that would travel on the eastern boundary of the site, and there would be an additional access point along the eastern side. As part of this, the applicant has prepared a traffic impact analysis. The most recent TIA was reviewed by the Public Works Committee on November 20th. In general, the Public Works Committee is comfortable with the TIA. There's been a few renditions of that, but we've reached the point where the committee is mostly comfortable with that. The applicant did provide a bus pickup and potential bus drop-off location. The applicant is proposing potentially having the buses come from South Nine Mound. They would enter from South Nine Mound, wrap towards the back of the building, and then loop back through and come back out towards South Nine Mound as well. As part of this, South Nine Mound and West Verona Avenue would also be signalized as part of this development. One comment that staff has had is from where the bus drop-off point is to where the school entrance point is. It is a considerable distance, and we would just encourage the applicant to potentially consider some type of vestibule, or to protect the children basically exiting the bus and having to walk as far as the current distance is. The applicant has provided pedestrian features and amenities through the site. They do have larger sidewalks than you typically find in most developments. One sidewalk of a note is the one that starts where the bus drop-off is and extends all the way up to this road BB. The only comment staff has on this one is potentially cutting off this kind of stub from the point here to the north. This kind of dead ends in this location and may potentially encourage kids to cross the road and not at an intersection. So staff would encourage them to cut this off between the tennis courts and direct people to head west up to a safer crossing at the intersection. If the district wants to keep that in place, we would recommend that there be a 10-foot wide bike and ped path installed along here for safer pedestrian and bike travel. As part of this as well, we do recommend that a bike and ped path be installed along the north side of Road AA and also along the west side of Road BB, just to provide additional bike and pedestrian amenities to the site. Bicycle traffic will be available through hopefully the bike and ped path that is also planned, but also from the Military Ridge State Trail. So staff has no concerns right now with bicycle connections. Vehicle movements for parent and drop-off. This was also provided in your packet. They're looking at 2 potential drop-off locations, and this was reviewed as part of the traffic impact analysis as well. There'd be a drop-off area in the front of the school, and then there would also be a drop-off area in the southwest corner of the school as well. These areas would be accessible from most likely Wall Street or West End Circle. Potentially, though, someone could access this from the back as well too. So there's multiple ways that this site could be accessed. Parking, the applicant is proposing approximately 1,400 parking spaces to accommodate staff, students, and sporting events. The high school can accommodate approximately up to 2,200 students currently, with an additional 2,300 students to bring the total capacity to 2,500. The applicant didn't provide a breakdown of the potential number of staff members, estimated number of non-bus students, so we can't provide a complete parking analysis at this time. I think initially the parking does seem to be appropriate on the site, but we'll need that additional information to provide a complete analysis. The design of the building itself, the applicant did submit conceptual building renderings in here. The applicant is proposing a more modern looking building that would include predominantly masonry, architectural cast stone, and the use of metal panels. And these are depicted in the plans before you and also in your submittal. If you look at the legend and the key here, this will kind of indicate approximately where in the building these images are taking place. The building itself will have many kind of gray tones and earth tones. They do accent the site with the Wildcat or Verona orange as well. Staff appreciates the use of those accents, but we would recommend additional color kind of be added to the building. Currently, it may be a rendering function, but it's currently as shown on the screen. From staff's opinion, it does seem rather gray, and additional color could be added to the site to add more character to the building itself. We did include a note of sustainability in our staff report. This is one item that we'd like to see the applicant just submit additional information on. We'd like to know kind of what additional sustainable features are being included in this building. I'm sure there's a bunch of them, but would be good, helpful, and good to have that list available for the Plan Commission and Council to review. We did provide some potential recommendations and suggestions in the staff report. Future plans will include landscaping as part of the plans. A significant amount of landscaping will be required as part of this project due to the impervious surface areas and also the size of the buildings. One item to note regarding landscaping was that during the November 20th Public Works meeting, a representative from Cleary Building Corporation raised the concern about students entering the Cleary property from the school district property. And that reference was along this property line along the east here. And that representative from Cleary suggested that the school district be required to install a fence between the new road and the western boundary with Cleary. I spoke with the police chief. There are just typical people walking across yards. That's the typical comments they get if there's a concern being raised. It's just kids or students or potentially even adults just taking the shortest path to whatever destination they have, which is common in any type of setting. Staff recommends that this not be included as a condition of the approval, but the school district, if it becomes an issue, to work with Cleary and just be a good neighbor and either work on the problem through fencing or potentially work on the problem through enforcement. But I don't think it's an issue for the Plan Commission or Council to handle. I think the district can handle that on a case-by-case basis. Lighting will be required as part of future submittals. One thing that staff will recommend is that the lighting plan have 100% downlighting, dark sky compliant lighting. I think due to the scale and the amount of parking, it'd be good to have it look at least dark, especially during the nighttime hours. Obviously, the one difference or caveat to that is the athletic fields and the lighting of their requirements as well. One item also for the applicant to consider with their light poles is to potentially partner with a communication provider. That's something the city has done with our athletic fields and our poles as well, but there is potential for partnerships that the city has capitalized in the past as well too.
Adam, can I interrupt you just for a second? Catherine, would you mind asking them to be just a little quieter in the back, please? We can't close both of the doors. It's an open meeting, so. Thank you, Mr. Sir.
Oh, I'm done. So with that,
Oh, you're done.
I recommend the Plan Commission review the submitted materials and provide feedback to the applicant. I know the school district is here tonight, as well as the architects. I'm sure they'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you, Mr. Sir. Sorry to cut you off there. I didn't know you were done. Questions, comments, concerns from Plan Commission members? Also want to give Superintendent Gorell or Mr. Roberts anything that you wanted to add?
If happy to entertain any questions. We have a team from EUA here tonight and JSD also to talk about technical questions you might have.
Okay. Questions, concerns, comments from Plan Commission members? Mr. Manley, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you to all of you for joining us tonight, and sorry that you had to wait so long for your item on the agenda. As I look at the site plan that's on the screen right now, I think it looks like one that makes sense in terms of the way the campus lays out with the buildings and the parking and the roads and the athletic fields. So I guess from that standpoint, it seems like you're off to a really good start. The one comment I would make with respect to the building elevations that were included in our packet, and this is kind of building off some of the things that Adam said, is if there was any way to make the building just a little bit more architecturally interesting, and maybe it is, and they're just not coming through in those drawings, but it seemed pretty boxy to me, and I know it's a school. So we're not looking for something that looks like a castle or something that necessarily looks like it's going to be on Epic's property, but anything that could be done to break up some of those long expanses of roof line, I think would be great. But otherwise, I think from my standpoint, this looks like a very well thought out, well considered layout and proposal.
Thank you, Mr. Manley. Additional questions, comments, concerns? Or questions for the school district? Mr. Heinzen,
No, I
please.
would say I just concur with the report that Adam did in the comments of Mr. Manley.
I do as well. Mr. Manley?
Just one question in terms of lighting. And I know that a lot of times you know, you don't want to have this great big glowing beacon. But there's also a lot of activities that occur in the evening and after school and at certain times of the year, like the one like now and into the winter, it gets dark pretty easily. And I think one of the things that we should be thinking about when we're thinking of what the lighting plan looks like is making sure we've got enough light that kids who are going to be on school property when it's dark out, that there's adequate light, that there's not a safety problem or a safety concern.
Thank you. Additional feedback at this point? Any additional feedback? If not, we greatly appreciate you being here this evening. Thank you, everyone. With that, we're going to move to reports and comments from the planning department. Mr. Sayre, please.
I think in your packet there was a development update spreadsheet. I'd be happy to answer any questions on that. The only other update that I have is the next Plan Commission meeting is January 2nd, which is the first Tuesday because the holiday is on the 1st. So if anyone has any conflicts with that date, the sooner you can let me know, the better. Obviously, we're having small groups here, so if you can't make it, the sooner you can let me know, just the better, so we can make different arrangements.
Mr. Heinzen, please. Mr. Sayre?
I would anticipate potentially modifications to an existing plat that we've had some conversations with for Kettle Creek North. That's out there. Working on a conditional use permit down in Liberty Business Park that may or may not happen. And then we also may have a concept for development that's in the north neighborhood as well too. Who knows what else might trickle in, but those are the ones that are potentially out there right now. And we have some ordinance cleanup that we've been doing internally as well. If it's ready, it may be on there too.
Go ahead, Mr. Heinzen.
Sure, thanks. I was just curious, I don't know what the timing is on the development, the Curlick development in Northwest neighborhood. Is that something that we're going to see 3 months from now, or more quickly would you expect?
Mr. Sayre?
I think a lot of it's going to depend on the agreements that we would have to have in place with the developers, and we currently don't have any agreements in place. So the first step would be to enter in those agreements, and then from that point we can better establish a timeline.
Thanks. Mr. Horsfall, please.
The Ace property, am I missing it on here? Do you have a story on that?
Mr.
So
Sayre?
the developer has withdrawn those plans, the redevelopment plans, the downtown there, at the Ace property and the World of Variety property. So both those parcels are on the market and for sale.
Have you heard anything? Are people interested in that one, or?
I think people are interested. I think it's a matter of kind of just, I think purchasing anything, we're coming to agreement on price is always the important part of,
Okay.
and how the property is going to be used. But there's definitely interest, yeah. I have a meeting tomorrow morning with someone who's interested in it. But I have lots of those meetings too that sometimes.
Like everyone's probably disappointed, you drive by and see Ace having the big, close sign and World Variety, but, so, great, thank you.
We're trying. We're contacting people ourselves too and encouraging them to contact the property owners.
Mr. Manley, please.
Thank you. One of the items under the approved projects but waiting for construction that's been kind of in that category for a long time now, or for what feels like a long time now, is the commercial along West Verona Avenue that we've referred to in the past as the Steve Brown property. Do we have any update on, is there any movement at all?
So there's two commercial properties on there. You've got the Sugar Creek Commons development, and Mr. McCorsky and I and our city staff were working on a developer's agreement for that development, and they're still targeting starting that here in 2018, spring is 2018, potentially acquisition, and then starting remediation immediately after that. So the Sugar Creek Common Ones is still on track, just working through the developer's agreement. Steve Brown Apartments is not going forward with their plans as of right now. I know they watch these meetings, so I'll make sure I word this carefully. Their plans have potentially changed, and they're looking at doing all commercial out there. So as part of that traffic impact analysis, that was built into that TIA with the school district as having all commercial out there. Part of the delay too was they were concerned about potential construction fatigue for their existing tenants in those buildings. So if they would have started this year, and then the district starts in the spring of next year, and then UW Health, the clinic owns property out there as well. If they move forward with their project, you could have potentially 5 years of construction, and they were very concerned about trying to minimize that as much as possible as well too. So, but they are looking at modifications to it and making changes to it to make that all commercial. And those will be coming forward here at some point in the near future.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Other questions for Adam? I'm not seeing any. Do we have any reports or comments from plan commissioners? Not seeing any. I would be ready for a motion to adjourn. We have a motion by Mr. Horsfall. Is there a second? Second. Seconded by Mr. Heinzen. All those in favor of adjournment signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Motion carried. We are adjourned. Happy holidays, everyone.
You too. Yeah.